Today I'm going to be doing my 23 books for 2023. I have my trusty notebook with me with all my list of books. Now, if you've seen my goals for 2023 video, you will know that I'm not really attaching numbers to my reading this year. I do think that 23 books is relatively achievable. So many of these books cross over into the other areas of my reading. So some of them are translated, some of them are authors that I've read in previous years and loved and I want to read something else by them. There's at least one short story collection in here, and reading short stories is one of my goals. So this is not like a whole separate TBR, but I did want to join in this game of picking 23 books that I'd like to have read by the end of this year. So I thought I'd take you through that with me. First book that we have is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I also have the audiobook that was created by Amazon. It's one of the Amazon originals on Audible. I listened to Sense and Sensibility last year, really enjoyed the audiobook of that. So I'd quite like to do the next one this year, which I believe is Pride and Prejudice. The other reason I'm quite interested to read this particular book of Jane Austen's is because I read The Children of Men by P.D. James a couple of years ago, and it was one of my favourite books of that year. And P.D. James has written a book called Death Comes to Pemberley, which is like a murder mystery set after the events of Pride and Prejudice, and so I'd really quite like to go on to read that as well. I think my sister has a copy of that. So I don't know if I'll read that book this year, but I certainly would like to get through Pride and Prejudice in 2023. Book 2 is not necessarily one book or like one specific book, but in 2021, one of my favourite books was On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. I've also just read Atonement by Ian McEwan, loved them both. So there's a reading blog for Atonement that has just come out as well. So my second book for 2023 that I would like to read is Something by Ian McEwan. I currently own Enduring Love, as you can see I've got a charity copy, which I think was a Booker nominated book. So I've got this one. I've also got Machines Like Me on my Kindle. So I've got two choices for Ian McEwan, but so far I've just loved his writing. So that's the next one on this list. The next book I'm going to add is Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I read her short story The Visit this year and it was brilliant, and so I decided I want to read something by Chimamanda. This is the only one that I own at the moment, and this is also on my list of my TBR for reading Black authors. This is like one of the most well-loved books I think I possibly own. Not only did it win the Women's Prize in the year that it was published, but it then won the Women's Prize of Prizes that they did a few years back, where they went back through all their previous years of prizes and chose the most beloved book, and it was this one. For book number 4, I've chosen The Memory Police by Yoko Agawa. This is a translated fiction. This is a dystopia. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, one of my favourite genres is dystopia. And this one seems to have that melancholic dystopia that I realise, and I'm beginning to realise that I love. So The Memory Police, which I have on Kindle, is number 4. Number 5, I've added My Uncle Oswald by Roald Dahl. This is one of the books that's been on my TBR the longest, hence why I wanted to make sure I got around to reading it. I remember hearing one of my friends saying that they'd started reading Roald Dahl's adult novels and saying how much they enjoyed it. They only thought that Roald Dahl did children's fiction, which I did too, but that they were really loving the adult ones. And so when I saw this, I think at a car boot sale, I thought, okay, yeah, we'll try that. And then I have never picked it up. So this is the year that this needs to be read. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to get rid of it because it's been too long and it keeps getting sort of knocked down and down and down. It's only a short one, so hopefully I can whiz through it. Number 6 is The Roommate by Rosie Danan. This is a random romance book that has made it onto my shelves. I don't read romance generally. The reason this has remained on my shelves and not been passed on to someone else is because when I read reviews of this, it was described as being sex positive, which I think is unusual, really. It might not be. It might be less unusual now. Even in the description, it says both Josh and Clara believe women deserve better sex, and I think that's sort of something that will be interesting to read. Like, my romance has to just not be like soft, soft, gentle romance. Like, I want something with things I can dig my teeth into. So that is why this has remained on my TBR despite being romance. So you may have seen this one in my book haul over Christmas. It is Hollow City, the second book in the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series. I read this in 2022, very early on in 2022, and loved it. So for Christmas I asked for book 2, so I would really love to read book 2 this year. Okay, similar to Ian McEwan, I have now just picked Something By, and that is Something by Margaret Atwood. So I loved The Handmaid's Tale. It's the only thing I've read so far by Margaret Atwood, but this is one of my favourite books of all time. I'm hoping to do a reread of this year as part of my reread goal. Yeah, I wanted to read something by Margaret Atwood, and I've amassed a few books on my TBR by her. I have the Penelopead. This is the shortest one of her works that I own. Look at this cover though, it's so which I think is a Greek myth retelling. Yeah, for Penelope, wife of Odysseus, maintaining a kingdom while her husband was off fighting the Trojan War was not a simple business. I won't go into too much because I don't want to know too much, but this is a contender, maybe because it's the shortest, it might be the one I go for. I don't know. But other Margaret Atwoods that I have, we've got Elias Grace, which is historical fiction. This one is set in the 1840s, and it's around the true story of one of the most enigmatic and notorious women of that time. Margaret Atwood has created an extraordinarily potent tale of sexuality, cruelty and mystery, so that is a very intriguing. And then the most recent one I picked up, I just saw for £1.99 in the Oxfam charity shop, The Blind Assassin, which is a Booker Prize nominee. Not winner, I don't think. No, shortlisted for the 1997 Booker Prize. So this is possibly the biggest one, but I love that cover. So we have some options for Margaret Atwood. So the next one is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I only have this beautiful edition with the beautiful end papers and everything because at one point I was a member of the Books That Matter book club that sends out a monthly subscription book. And this was one of the books. At the time that I received it, I was really sceptical about Sally Rooney. But obviously in 2022, Normal People was one of my favourite books of the year. So I've decided this is the year that I need to read the next book that I own of hers. So that's on here. Similarly, one of my favourite books of 2022 was Rest and Be Thankful by Emma Glass. She then sent me her debut novel, which was Peach, with the handwritten note, which I showed you in my book haul in December of 2022. So this is a nice short one that I would really like to get. I'm hoping to read this in January actually, so this one may already be read by the time this video is published. I don't even know. So I have a collection of Persephone books. One year I signed up, when I had some money, I signed up for their 12-month subscription for books, and I chose 12 books to receive, one a month, and I read 3 of them out of the 12. So this year I'd like to knock off another one. The one I'd like to read is The Hopkins Manuscript by R.C. Sheriff, and this one is a bit of a dystopia. I believe it's about a man who basically predicts the end of the world, I think, and nobody listens to him. Everyone thinks he's just a quack, basically. So that's the one I'm most intrigued to read next. Okay, for number 12, we have Something by Patricia Highsmith. So the book that I read that prompted this is Deep Water. This was one of my favourite reads of 2021. And you make me really embarrassed when you come in and I don't like it. Give you a cup of tea. Bye. Oh, where was I? So Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith was one of my favourite reads of 2021. It really does embarrass me when people walk in while I'm filming. I don't know why. I don't mind watching my videos once they're published. Anyway, yeah. So this was like psychological thriller, domestic thriller. I remember staying up late to finish it because I really needed to know what the ending was. Loved it. And I have 2 Patricia Highsmiths on my shelf. I have Strangers on a Train, which I think is one of her most famous work, which involves 2 people meeting on a train and deciding they want to kill their wives and plotting to kill the other's wives, and something happening. I don't know, but yeah, I'm quite intrigued by that one. And then the other one I own is Carol, which is the one that was originally published under another name because it was so out there for the time that it was written, and it's only recently been credited to her. So first published under a pseudonym in 1952. So yeah, one of these is going to be read. Number 13 is How to Be Good by Nick Hornby. So one of my favourite books of 2021 was Juliet Naked. And now looking at the cover of this and like reading the back, I would not have thought this would have been one of my favourite reads at all. I read it because I think this is listed as one of the books that is currently studied at A-level on one of the syllabuses in the UK. So I was intrigued to read books that are currently being studied for English literature, and I'm really glad I read that. Obviously it ended up being one of my favourite books of the year. It had really interesting conversations about how art is received. So in this case it's music, but it talks about how the person making the music feels, how people who are fans feel about the music, and then how people who are just sort of general consumers who like it but don't, you know, obsessive fans consume it. And I really loved some of the like thought processes in this. So the next one I own, which also happens to be a Booker nominated book, is How to Be Good. This one sounds more up my street than Juliet Naked did, so hopefully that's not a bad sign and I'll end up not liking it. But yeah, so that's why I wanted to read another Nick Hornby. We have come to another translated fiction that I'd like to read, and that is The Proof by Cesar Era. This is published by And Other Stories, which is an indie publisher in the UK. I think based in Sheffield. The Proof is translated by Nick Caster, and I want to read this because this year, or the year before, maybe, I read The Divorce by Cesar Era. This one is translated by Chris Andrews, and it's one of those that I want to reread because I always describe it as being lost in a forest. It's absolutely beautiful. It is stunning. It is spectacular. But I had absolutely no idea where I was. I was completely lost. So I think I need to reread this and experience it again. But this year I would like to read another one of Cesar Era's works, and it meets my sort of reading more translated fiction goal. It is clearly going to be a theme of every video I do lately, where there's going to be a camera malfunction in the middle of it. So sorry about this. I'm doing what I can in terrible lighting. So I think we had gotten to number 15, and number 15 is The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is one of the oldest books on my TBR because my sister lent this to me when I was just coming back into reading again, back into fiction reading. I said to my mum and my sister, what book should I read? What do you recommend? What do you have on your shelves? Send me something. And this was in the depths of the pandemic, so my sister sent me this. It's the second book in the Shadow of the Wind series. I have definitely read the first one, but long enough ago that I can't massively remember the plot. But I have looked online and it does suggest that even though this is the second book in that series, that it can be read out of order, so it doesn't matter too much. Not only does it knock off something that I wanted to read for quite a while, but it also meets my translated goals. This one is translated by Lucia Graves, so there we go. Number 15 is another one that hits my translated goals. We have 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This one kept popping up on my TBR this year. I kept trying to add it each month and then not getting round to it. I think I'm really nervous about reading it because so many people put it on their favourite books of all time list. I'm a bit like, I'm probably going to hate it because everyone loves it. But then I felt that way about Sally Rooney, and I felt that way about so many other books and then loved them. So this being on this list is my prompt to actually get it read this year. This version, I don't know if they're all translated by the same people, but the copy I have is translated from the Spanish by Gregory Rabassa. Number 17. I'm sort of thinking that maybe I might quite like classic Russian literature, maybe. So here we have another famous one, The Trial by Franz Kafka. Please be. I'm going to find out now that it's not a Russian classic. No, it's not a Russian classic. He was born in Prague. Great. Well, that makes me look very knowledgeable. But anyway, The Trial by Franz Kafka. A relatively short one as well. Just over 200 pages, this copy. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Ooh, husband and wife? Sister and brother? I don't know. That's cool. Anyway, I just have this feeling that it's going to be similar in style to Crime and Punishment. That is what I've heard. So that's probably why I thought it was a Russian classic, but there we go. number 18, and we have another translated fiction. This is All Dogs Are Blue by Rodrigo de Souza Lau, translated by Zoe Perry and Stephen Tobler, and has an introduction by Deborah Levy, who is becoming an author that I'm realising I rather like. So looking forward to reading this one. It's a very short one. I think I'm kind of planning, it's not one of my official goals, but I'm kind of planning on reading at least one novella a month. Maybe as like my first book of the month, like once I've finished any reading that's carried over from one month to the next, I might try and, pop in a novella just to see me through, just to get like a nice quick one out of the way. But yeah, this one, unfortunately, I know I saw Jen Campbell really didn't like this one. She's read, I think, most of And Other Stories backlist. She really didn't like this, but I'm hoping that the absurdity of it is going to work for me. That's what I understand about it, that it is very absurd. So that is number 18. Number 19 is the only short story collection that I'm including on this 23 for 2023 list. But as you'll know from my other video, if you've watched it, I am planning on reading more short stories this year. This one is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which I've had on my TBR for a long time. I originally came across this because I know that when I was doing English literature at school, other classes were studying this and were loving it. I was really gutted that it wasn't the sort of thing we studied. So it's been on my shelves for quite a while. But since then, I have seen so many people raving about this, specifically raving about Angela Carter's writing. So this is not the only Angela Carter I've got on my shelves, but this will be my first Angela Carter when I get around to reading it. So one of my favourite books of 2022 was The Garden of Eden by Ernest Hemingway. And then did I mention it? I might have cut it out. I certainly rambled on about the fact that Eden by Sonia Overall was published this year. And this is a book that is heavily inspired by The Garden of Eden. In fact, Penelope is an English professor who finds herself obsessed with Ernest Hemingway's last novel, The Garden of Eden, as she becomes infatuated with a young male student. Decades earlier, Ernest Hemingway is in Cuba writing The Garden of Eden, a strange and prescient story that reveals the secrets of his own sexuality. And Catherine, the young wife in The Garden of Eden, speaks to us as she tests the confines of her fictional existence and rebels against the whims of her creator. Eden is a beautiful, thrilling novel that makes us think about the nature of attraction and how we use our imaginations to form ourselves. So this was published this year in the summer. I had intended to read it pretty much straight away when it was published, but unfortunately, alas, these things never work out. This one may well end up being a summer read because it feels, probably that cover, feels like a summer read set in Cuba. Yeah, so it may well be a summer read, but this is on my, what number is this? This is number 20 on my 20 for 2023 list. Okay, number 21 is one I have on my Kindle, and I mentioned that I read Eros Unbound, a short story collection by Anais Nin last year. It was one of my favourite short story collections. Not necessarily because I enjoyed every single story, but because it has made me think so much and because I can't stop thinking about it and the things it did. So I decided I really wanted to read some more Anais Nin this year, and I have A Spy in the House of Love on my Kindle, so that I think is going to be my next Anais Nin read. Okay, in 2022 I read Boy Snowbird by Helen Oyeyemi, and I loved this all the way through. I think Helen Oyeyemi is a fantastic writer. Ultimately, the storyline ends up being a little bit transphobic. I don't know if it's intentionally transphobic, but there's a line in it or a section in it about helping a trans character find themselves again, find who they really were, which I didn't like, but I don't think it was intended as transphobia. I don't know. I've never seen Helen Oyeyemi broach that subject, in interviews or anything, but I'm sufficiently intrigued by the writing to try something else, and I have Mr. Fox on my TBR. Again, I think this is one of the oldest ones on my TBR, and so that'd be nice to sort of knock it off and say I've read some of the older books that I've had sitting on my shelves for quite a while, and I am very intrigued. As I say, I loved her writing. You alright, darling?
I need to show you.
Sorry, just been interrupted by one of my children who wanted to show me some Lego. So suitably intrigued by Helen Oyeyemi's writing. And I really like the premise of this one, so this one is on my list of 23 books to read for 2023. And then we're on the final book, we're on number 23 of 23. And so we have To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. So Mrs. Dalloway was one of my top 3 classics that I read in 2022. Not not the easiest to read, but I can't stop thinking, like I really can't stop thinking about it, and so I'm now desperate to read basically everything Virginia Woolf has ever written. And the next one that I actually own is To the Lighthouse. I think Orlando is the one that everyone talks about that I'm really desperate to read as well, but I don't own that one, so I have put To the Lighthouse on my TBR. So there we have it, guys. 23 books for 2023. And with all the camera issues and interruptions and it being Christmas, this has been chaotic. I hope that you have been enjoying all of this end of the year content. It's one of my favourite things to make. It's one of my favourite things to watch other people make. So I really hope you enjoyed it.